Welcome back to the B-Sides of Sports. Today we are just recapping the second round of the playoffs. It's kind of coming to a close here with kind of clear frontrunners sort of distinguishing themselves from the rest of the pack, but still, there's plenty of basketball to be played, and I mean, more than ever in recent years, we've seen a 3-1 lead. Does not mean nearly as much as I feel like it once did. So starting things off, we're going over to the West Coast, where the Lakers and Warriors have had a pretty heated series. I honestly don't want to say that the 3-1 lead does it justice. I feel like it's been a really close and competitive series. Two very solid veteran teams with some exciting young players that have really been on display these past few games. So Wilson, what do you think about the series so far and what's to come?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start off with a hot take that, as the next couple of days kind of unfold, might not turn out to be a super hot take, but I still really like the Warriors' chances in this series. Obviously, we know that a team down 3-1, the stat everyone throws out is that the team that's been up 3-1 has won 95.3% of those series. That being said, and like you kind of alluded to earlier on, that 3-1 lead hasn't been as much of a sure thing last couple of years, in large part due to 3-point variance, as well as just some different circumstances we've seen around the league with offensive-minded teams kind of flourishing in the playoffs more so than the defensive-minded teams of the past. And with this Warriors team, they have a couple of things in their favor. I think we like to start with one, they get games 5 and 7 at home. And so if you look at it from the perspective of if you win one game at a time, it seems like the Warriors should be favored and will win game 5. If they can go on the road and win game 6, game 7 does become that coin flip anyone can win. Again, people also want to point out that the Warriors have been down 3-1 before and they've won. And, it'd be a little bit of kind of ironic poetic justice if Steph gets LeBron back for blowing that 3-1 lead against Cleveland back in 2016. That being said, I don't think it's an easy thing. And I think there are a lot of people that are really high on it just because the Warriors have done it before and because it feels like, a thing of destiny, right? For lack of a better term. For me, just looking at the play and how it's unfolded on the court, I like the Warriors for a number of reasons. And one is kind of what you spoke to. It doesn't really seem like this series has been dominated by the Lakers. We've seen 2 blowouts and then 2 close games. And in both of the close games, the Warriors have had opportunities to win down the stretch. And in that way, it reminds me of that King series in the first round, where when the Warriors were down 2-0, it still felt like they were very much in the series and they rattled off 3 straight wins. Obviously, the Kings got game 6, but again, I think it shows that with this Warriors roster that we're seeing this year, they're not able to be as dominant as they used to be back in the day, but they're still able to find ways to win games. So I like the Warriors in game 5. I think if game 6 they can win it, I think game 7 becomes the pivotal swing. And while that may seem obvious, I give the Warriors probably a 60% chance to complete the comeback, which seems high, but I've been on the Warriors all year.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point. I'm not so high on the Warriors. At this point, I just see the Lakers getting through. I mean, they talked about it a lot on the broadcast. The free throw discrepancy is something that I didn't think would be as big of a factor, but when you are a team like the Warriors that does shoot a lot more outside shots, as well as just, a lot of screens, a lot of open shooters taking shots, there not a ton of contested buckets, getting these free throws. And in the playoffs, you aren't going to get the calls regardless, but the Lakers, having guys like LeBron and AD, you're just going to get the calls. It's the nature of the game, unfortunately. Those guys are very dramatic in how they play offense, and that's it really just encourages those foul shots. And so, like you said, I think they're a veteran team and they aren't as great as they once were. To me, it is the lack of number 2 now that we're starting to see really hurt them. Klay Thompson's just too streaky ever since that injury. Jordan Poole is just having a terrible playoff series for some reason. And, they started a guy like Gary Payton yesterday just because of his defense more, right? And he's a solid hustle guy. But, I mean, when he's your 3rd highest scorer on a team, when he hasn't started since last year, it just kind of makes you question, do we have someone who can play complementary enough to Steph to allow this team to get over? Because the Lakers, like I said, they have more than 3 guys who I think can go for 30. I really like D'Angelo Russell, LeBron, AD, and Reeves. I think all those guys on any given night can go for 30. And the way the Warriors are playing, it really only feels like Steph can every night, and the rest of them are all trying to play catch up. So I just think right now the way the Warriors are playing isn't what they've kind of won on. It is not reminiscent of those teams. It's a lot of missed shots, a lot of lazy play, as well as turnovers. 16 turnovers in last game in a close 3-point game. If you're turning over the ball 16 times, I mean, not necessarily what you want. I mean, you have 2 of those back to even it out, and then it's a tie ball game. So I like the Lakers here in 5, honestly, if I'm being honest. I just think the Warriors now, especially with Poole, he was such a dynamic talent for them, with him just looking like he's out of it at this point, only playing 10 minutes last game, not even scoring a bucket, as well as Clay going in single figures. I think the Lakers win in the next one.
And I think that's the looming question. I think the way you frame that is a really good perspective on it. I think the question becomes, are the Warriors really just old and past their dynastic run, or will we see a regression to the mean? And by that I mean, are we going to see Poole have another breakout game like he had in that first game when he had 21? Is Clay going to be able to get hot again? Can Draymond have a vintage defensive performance? Because I think when you're considering this Warriors roster and the way it's played, honestly, all the players on that roster except Steph have really underperformed in this entire postseason, and we've kind of seen Steph compensate for a lot of that. The truth be told, the Warriors shouldn't have made it out of round 1, but we saw Steph put that team on his back in quite a few of those games where they were able to pull out the win and just be a fantastic offensive player, establishing himself as one of the top 10 guys of all time. On the flip side, then, it's like, are Draymond and Clay, are they just at the age where they can no longer dig into that kind of championship DNA, that wealth of knowledge? Or is it, and I don't want to call it a switch, because if it was a switch, I think it would have been flipped by now, but can they pull out a couple of more of those vintage performances to kind of ride the Warriors through the second round? I still like the DNA, and I think in part that's because I've trusted in it all year, and I don't want to kind of back down off of that right now. But I don't think the other side is necessarily a bad take. I do think there is a lot of value in just kind of thinking, it never ends pretty, is what they always say, right? You can never go down. The Jordan 6-0, winning and then retiring, that doesn't happen really in sports. And so I think it is a really high probability as well that, it could just be over for the Warriors because they're old, and Steph might have blinded us to a lot of those weaknesses.
Yeah, and I think that's just kind of what I feel like is the age of them, but it's not that I think the Warriors under Steve Kerr are never going to win a championship again. I just think at this point now, if they get eliminated, he has to kind of look inside, take inventory, and be like, all right, Clay's past his best playing days. Okay, we need to let Jordan Poole become this number 2 that Clay once was. I think they just need to retool and try to give Steph 1 or 2 more by shifting around pieces. Because to me, if they don't win this series, it really is just like you're relying on vintage performances and, these games that were normal 4 years ago to just happen. And that's what you have to do to win, is have them play in their prime. So I just think if your guys have to be playing at their best every game for your team to win, is that really, a legitimate win, or is that more of just, one last hurrah? And I think that's just kind of what this year is for the Warriors. I think, winning that one against the Celtics, I think it just showed, how talented the roster really is. But, in that series, you also saw their age, especially when the young Celtics teams would run the floor. You never saw Warriors team get outran ever, for the last 7 years. But in that series against the Celtics, there was a few times where you're like, man, they really are, believe it or not, starting to show their age and show that they are human and they can lose, and that even dynasties have weaknesses. Like you said, the 6-0 Jordan Bulls are really just flukes and anomalies at this point. It's not a thing you can strive for, really, because it's just almost like impossible to emulate because of circumstantial reasons.
Absolutely. And if we could stay on the Warriors for just one quick moment, the last thing that I've kind of been thinking about these last couple of days with kind of what looks like it could be the end of this Warriors dynasty is we're really seeing the downfall of this 2 timeline plan that the Warriors front office really tried to manage. And, if we consider those young Warriors players, James Wiseman has been traded to Detroit. Jonathan Kuminga can't get a minute in the first or second round of these playoff series. Jordan Poole seems to be worse this year than he was last year. And Moses Moody, who was the lowest draft pick, obviously Poole I think was 28, but we expected Poole to have higher expectations this year. Moses Moody is the only guy that really looks to prove himself as to be a part of, their 7-8 man rotation. And that's not saying much, because as good as Moody has played, he obviously isn't making a huge winning impact out there. So, I think it's a team that I think 2 years ago, I really thought that this 2 timeline plan was going to work. And now I think the front office might be asking themselves questions on if they failed to surround the core, Steph, Clay, Draymond, with veteran talent in order to really push winning in the twilight of Steph's career, as opposed to trying to, run this thin line of, can we win now with the core and also establish youth? Because I don't think it worked out for them.
Yeah, and I think that's the point about veterans, because they have some really good young players on the team, guys like Looney and Poole, and you brought up Moody. But, I think about their famous runs, and it was guys like Livingston or Iguodala or Leandro Barbosa. It was guys like that, David West. Guys like that really provided that spark, because they had that veteran mindset. So they'd been around the league. They knew how to win within a certain extent. So then you plug them into a system with all the star power you'll ever need to win, and they're going to make the plays needed to win. Andrew Bogut was a guy. He made a career off moving screens and being an okay rebounder because he fit what they did so well and helped them win. And I think that, your point was great about just, maybe they didn't look at what and realize what value guys like that really brought. Sean Livingston was never going to drop 30 points in a game, but he was going to hit every mid-range shot he took and have 10 points at the end of the game. And you're seeing it right now with Poole and guys like Kuminga and Moody, these young guys showing their age compared to what the veterans used to do and really show up for them.
And the chemistry, I think, is another part that was underrated with the veterans, right? The veterans were there to win. And I think, there's been a lot of reports the last couple of days how the young Warriors aren't happy with their roles. And I don't really think you can have that on your way to a championship.
Yeah, no, for sure. And then carrying over to, I'd say another really sought after matchup was the Sixers Celtics. Obviously a very storied rivalry in the East, but obviously Celtics coming into this were the favorite. Both teams played very close in the regular season, but the Celtics never played a full strength 76ers team, and the Celtics themselves had their fair share of injuries. So this was kind of finally our first chance to really get to see them play. And, as we sit now, the Sixers won tonight, 115-103 over the Celtics, taking the series to 3-2. And Wilson, what are your kind of thoughts here as Philadelphia Sixer looks to go home and try to win it at home?
Yeah, Drake, I got to tell you, as a fan, it's so funny to me how being down 2-1, right, losing home court in a series can feel so detrimental. And to me, after that Game 3 loss, it really felt like, here we go again. The Celtics are really just owning the Sixers. We know the history. 2018, we lost in 5. 2020, we lost in the bubble with an injured Embiid and no Ben Simmons. And obviously this year, again, it looked like the Celtics were going to run over this kind of a hampered Embiid, and just the Sixers can't get over the hump. Game 4, Game 5, obviously I feel a lot different about this series right now. And, I got to go to the man of the hour, James Harden. He really has proven himself on this playoff stage. And I know a lot of people want to say, it's the second round, how much can he prove? But to me, what we've seen a more mature version of Harden, and a Harden that is truly willing to do anything to win. Game 1, we talked extensively about, and just how incredible that performance was, a vintage James Harden Rockets performance. And then games 2 and 3, Harden came out and had a couple flat tires. So, and to me, what was so exciting about the Game 4 Harden performance was there was the spotlight, there was the pressure, and Harden came through not once but twice with the shot at the end of regulation and the shot in overtime. I could go on about how Embiid has continued to play well against the Celtics, but to me, the difference really is James Harden. In the past, Embiid has averaged quite similar numbers. I know his field goal percentage has been lower against Al Horford and the Celtics defense, but he's always given about 30 and 10 a night against the Celtics roster. This year, the difference in the Sixers being able to get these wins has truly been Harden, and not just the impact that Harden himself on scoring the basketball, but the offense that he's able to get us into in terms of getting Tobias Harris going, getting guys easy 3-point looks, whether it's Niang or Melton, and Maxey. Maxey has struggled a lot against the Celtics historically, but he had a really good Game 5. And, looking forward, I just hope that we can build off the momentum. Again, Harden doesn't have to score 30 for us to win, but if Harden can control the tempo of that offense and Embiid can give the production that he always gives, I feel good about the Sixers closing it out.
Yeah, no, and I agree. Obviously, I know I've always admitted I'm biased to James Harden. He's my favorite player ever, but I just think when Doc Rivers finally realized he can just let the offense be run through James Harden and be confident in it. He used to be so scared to let Embiid come off the floor, I felt like. And so I feel like that Game 1 was kind of an eye-opener for him, and he realized, and now we've seen 2 40-point games from Harden. We've also seen 2 really terrible games. But that was as soon as Embiid came back in the lineup, he just really started to struggle. And now I think he's kind of found a perfect balance of letting both of his stars have the shine. Cause like you said, it's very James Harden playing a more mature role. He drew 2 charges tonight, as well as being more of a distributor. He hit 40 points last game, a game tying shot and a game winning shot. But then tonight he almost had a near triple double on only 8 shots. So it's just things like that where letting James Harden, be the best James Harden you can be on any given night, which is anything, let him be whatever the team needs. I think that's really opened it up. Like you said, Joel had really struggled, and I think it took James Harden stepping up and taking this role to kind of help Embiid realize, hey, like it isn't all on me. Like I should be the dominant myself that I am, right? I should have 30 points and 15 rebounds, but if I don't, I have a guy to back me up. And I also think it's underrated, the PJ Tucker effect. I feel like has been seen the past 2 games, especially with the grit. I feel like every clip I see of him, he's yelling at the guys on the bench, and it's not out of a place of anger. It's just like he was literally just there. He just won a championships. He knows what it takes. He played 40 minutes a game on a championship team, and he's doing the same thing now. And I think that also helped Embiid because tonight he looked just so much more confident. The game, what would that have been? Game 5, Game 4, Joel Embiid got blocked 6 times in that game. And by the end of the game, you look scared. And that's one of the reasons James Harden took those shots. And PJ Tucker was there to tell him, hey, let's stop. There's no reason to be scared. You literally just won MVP. Do what you did to get here. Keep doing it. Al Horford can only run up and down the floor so many times. You're younger than him by 7 years. You will outrun him. You will outmuscle him. And I think those 2 guys and their veteran presences have really been the lifting factor for this team. To me, those 2 guys are the X factors on this team, despite, again, PJ Tucker's lack of stat production and as well as James Harden's struggles. What they provide to the team, I think, is that veteran presence that I think the Warriors have struggled with outside of their core 4, where the Sixers now seem to have a few guys, it seems like, who really are just embracing this role, being an older player and trying to help their team win.
I love your points about Tucker there, and there's a lot of credit to go around for the 76ers roster. PJ Tucker, you just mentioned the intangibles that he brings, the energy that he's able to fire into the roster with just that veteran kind of steady presence. I also really love what Tobias Harris has been able to do. Again, I go back to calling him a glorified 4th option, but he's as steady as you can get. The offensive production has been there every single night. He's as efficient as you can ask for him to be. He's playing solid defense out there. And again, it's just that calm presence that can really kind of slow down the offense when things get out of hand. He's a nice player that we can go down low in the post when Embiid's not on the floor, and we can exploit him over the smaller guards when we get that switch. I also want to give some credit to Doc and Daryl Morey. Morey did a really great job of putting this roster together. We're really seeing a deep 76ers roster for the first time in recent history, at least in my memory. And Daryl Morey, a lot of jokes were made about him bringing in Harden and Tucker and House, all these old Rockets players. But to him, if the Sixers are able to win the championship this year, he's really going to be vindicated for that old Rockets roster he tried to put together. And on the Doc note, I really think Doc this year has done a really good job with these rotations. We've been playing about 8 players a night. Paul Reed comes in to replace those Embiid minutes. Melton's been a consistent player off the bench, and Niang as well. I've been a little sad to see McDaniels fall out of the rotation, but I think it was in part because of the lack of offensive production. And tonight we saw Daniel House come in and, even if it wasn't scoring the basketball, it's just the spacing he's able to provide and the aggressive mindset he takes on the court really had a positive benefit today. So again, I just really want to spread the credit. On the Celtics side of the ball, there's been a couple questions for me, and I think you've had some questions about Tatum for quite some time. For me, one of the concerning parts is something we talked about in game 1 as well, but Jaylen Brown and his lack of aggression. He has looked so good at parts in this series where he's come out and had 10, 12, 14 points in a quarter, and then he'll end the game with 10 or 11 shots. And I don't really understand the dynamic there. I know Brown's had some issues with being in Boston, and they've obviously tried to put him on the trade block quite a few times over the last couple of years. But it is just really puzzling to me how Brown, who at times really can look at like the Celtics' best player, just the lack of aggression down the stretch is really weird to see. And I think as good as the Sixers have played, the Celtics haven't done themselves any favors either.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Tatum reminds me a lot. I was just making the comparison to a Rockets James Harden, where it seems like they're starting to build this team around him, but they're just missing one piece. So in the regular season, he's carrying so much of the offensive load that come playoff time, Jason Tatum just has not looked good. And I don't think it's because he's unclutch. It's similar to how DeMar DeRozan was in the playoffs for so long, especially young in his career, where guys give him such a hard time for how they play. And I think we discount so much what they have to do to get their team there. As again, we talk about load management so much. I'm against it, but for a guy like Jason Tatum, who, seems like he looks tired. He looks gassed. I mean, he started both the last games 0 for 8 and 0 for 6 respectively. He looks slow. He looks a little sluggish. It looks like his legs are out from under him. And so I just wonder how much of that is because of the offensive load he carried. I mean, he did just finish 4th in the MVP conversation, deservingly so. I do think he doesn't even get enough credit being at 4th. I mean, he's a solid defender as well as doing, I love him on the offensive boards. I think it's an underrated part of his game, but again, two very draining parts of basketball. And then going to Jaylen Brown, it's the opposite, where again, he's only playing about like 35 to 38 minutes a game. And it's like you said, where I think it was game 4, he had 14 in the first and then ended with like 26. And it's just like, I think it's just that he wants out of Boston. But I mean, if I'm a team now going after Jaylen Brown, I'm scared of a guy who, if he just doesn't want to play, he just kind of stops shooting. He stops being aggressive, stops playing the brand of basketball that got him there. Very puzzling, and I just have to be honest, very concerning for Jaylen Brown's future as well as the Celtics, because what are you going to get on return for a guy? Now, obviously, he's a very talented player. I'm not trying to be dramatic and make a take out of nothing here, but for a guy who has a chance to be in the Eastern Conference Finals, and as the number 2 guy on the team, he really just has not been playing like it.
And again, I'd kind of touch on an intangible for Boston. To me, it feels like the proverbial Super Bowl appearance hangover, right? Where the loser of the Super Bowl oftentimes will have a really poor year after that appearance for one reason or another. And to me, the Celtics roster just doesn't have the same feel as it had last year. Under Udoka, and whether it's a changing of the coach or it's just something within that internal locker room, the Celtics just don't have that it factor that I saw watching them play last year. I don't think they play, I don't want to say they don't play as hard, but it's not the same energy. And it's odd to see because they have guys like Marcus Smart, now Horford, who are veterans that have been in the league for so long and they want to win. It's really unexplainable to me. And I think the Jaylen Brown situation really summarizes it. He looks so good at times, and then at other parts, he just completely falls apart. And that's what the Celtics offense and defense has looked to me. They go on these stretches where they seem like the clear favorite to make it to the finals and even win the title. And then they go through quarters where the offense is sputtering, the defense can't get a stop, and I don't really know what to make of it.
Yeah, that's kind of where I sit with the Celtics. I just think, and again, I knew going into the season with the whole coaching change because of, some underhanded stuff happening in the organization. I mean, that's a lot to play through regardless. But again, you think you'd be able to rally behind your star player having one of the best seasons by a Boston Celtic ever in their storied franchise. You think you'd be able to put some pieces around him, but I just think the issues have been more apparent than the strengths on this team throughout the playoffs. And so then carrying over, we're going to stay in the East and go to what I think has been the most boring series in the second round. I'll be honest, I usually kind of turn these on in the background because just hasn't been all that I was kind of excited for. And that's obviously the Knicks and Miami Heat. Obviously, Knicks being a very young team, more, kind of this fun upstart no one really saw coming. They handled the Cavaliers very easily, so everyone was kind of excited to see what they do in round 2. And they've done a whole lot of nothing in round 2 outside of what I feel like Jalen Brunson. Julius Randle has struggled. Meanwhile, the Heat have played great even when Jimmy Butler was out. They almost won. So they almost look better in some aspects. I mean, again, I think to me, you just see the veteran presence as well as coaching of what I think is one of the best coaches in the league, who's never won a Coach of the Year, I found out today, Eric Spoelstra. But yeah, I don't know. This series to me is pretty cut and dry. I pretty much just laid out all my thoughts for you now, and I'm just going to turn it over to you because I just don't have much on this series. I just think the Heat are the better team, and the Knicks, good try, but I think try again next year.
Yeah, I think you did a really good job kind of summarizing how a lot of people feel about this series. And while I don't want to be hyperbolic, really the only take I have on this series is, will the Miami Heat be one of the most dominant 8 seeds we've seen in recent history? They 3-1'd the 2 years ago defending champs Milwaukee Bucks, and 4-1, sorry, I misspoke there. And they just went up 3-1 against the Heat. And while obviously the Heat probably are the Knicks, are a lesser team than the Bucks, the Heat have just truly looked dominant. And that's with playing so many undrafted players. The roster isn't fully healthy. They're having to start guys like Kevin Love. And a lot of credit has been given to Jimmy Butler, and I think you did a good job of giving Eric Spoelstra a lot of the credit. Really, the Heat just are greater than the sum of their parts. It's a lot of what we kind of saw from the Warriors last year, where I don't know if a lot of people going into that postseason thought the Warriors team was the most star-studded or talented roster in the playoffs, but I think they played greater than the sum of their parts, and that's really what we see with Miami. They have shooting, they have grit, they have defense. The coaching edge is so apparent in every one of these games. Bud got the axe, and I don't think Tibbs is a bad coach, but I do think Tibbs is past his prime, and it's just the in-game adjustments, the X's and O's at the end of games, managing the shot clock, getting good shots and drawing plays out of timeouts. Spo's as good as it gets. The fact that he hasn't won a Coach of the Year is absolutely absurd, and combined with a team that really wants to win, Jimmy Butler's time is now. I do think the Heat easily win this series. If it's not Game 5, they're going to win in 6. I think the question becomes, do the Heat want to see the Celtics or the Sixers? And again, I don't even know if they care. I think the Heat might just want to beat anyone who's in front of them. I do think the Heat do pose some unique challenges for both the Sixers and the Celtics. I don't want to jump ahead too much, but again, there's just so much to like about this roster, even though it's not the most talented. And I think with a coach like Spo, he's always pressing the right button. So he's going to maximize the roster no matter what the matchup is. People forget that Miami was a Jimmy Butler shot away last year from making the finals again. And so people want to call the bubble an aberration. I think the Miami Heat are proving that it was not.
As well as the Lakers. I think there's a point to be brought up. I mean, both of them are playing well, but I think one of my last takeaways is I think DePaul might just be a new NBA powerhouse between Paul Reed and Max Struss. I mean, we got some real big-time players out of DePaul for whatever reason. But no,
it's
I
kind
agree.
of crazy.
It is. It's weird, to have two guys from the same college playing that well, especially like you said, when they're, I feel like, again, my biggest takeaway still here is just the coaching. I think that's the one thing Miami has over, honestly, anyone in the East right now. I think outside of Steve Kerr, I don't really know if there's a coach right now in the playoffs that I think could beat Spo head to head, but I just don't think he has the talent to play a team and win against a team like the Celtics or Sixers, honestly, is I think kind of my biggest takeaway. As well as Bam Adebayo is just a small center, and so then it's like, okay, well then he has to play and guard Joel for 45 minutes because you're going to let Cody Zeller guard him. I mean, I just don't think they have an answer for that. As well as Jason Tatum, I mean, you can put Jimmy Butler on him, but Jimmy Butler has already played some serious minutes, and he's already struggled a little bit with injuries. So having him run the floor with Tatum again, even though Tatum's not playing good, if you risk taking him off Tatum, if that's who makes it, then there's your issue. And like I said with Embiid, you're gonna play Bam Adebayo 48 minutes, or how are you gonna get around that? So I think as fun as the story the Heat have been, I don't think they're gonna win the East just because I think they have the two best teams in the East, in my opinion, as we came into the playoffs. So I think that's just kind of all I have on it.
Yeah, and while I wouldn't pick the Heat, I do think my counter and concern here would be how easily they kind of dispatched of the Bucks. And the Bucks had plenty of reasons. The Giannis injury, Middleton hasn't looked as good as he was. You and I discussed Holiday and his quiet shortcomings in the postseason. But I think what Miami has been able to do is enough reason for me to be slightly concerned and be on a yellow alert. I mean, Miami starts Max Strus and Gabe Vincent at their guard spots, and their rotation off the bench is Kyle Lowry and Duncan Robinson. I don't know if those guys are sniffing 20 minutes a game in the postseason on any other roster that's currently in the postseason, and honestly, anyone that went into the postseason. It's just really a testament, again, to the coaching. They're missing Victor Oladipo and Tyler Hero, who really combined for a large part of the Heat's offense this year, and the fact that it looks like they haven't missed a beat. I do think you make a good point, though. I don't necessarily know if these series look the same, if it's the Sixers or the Celtics offense on the other side, as opposed to the Knicks. The Knicks, we saw how ugly that series was against the Cavs, so I might be having a little bit of second-round perception bias here.
Yeah, and that's just kind of one of my things, too, is, the Knicks are a very young team too, so you're going to get away with a lot, and I think that's kind of the thing with the Heat. Now, again, they could wrap this one up quick, and then if the Sixers don't win, they could have a few days up of rest on them. So, again, I'm not saying that nothing, there's no way they win, but in my opinion, I just think the Heat have kind of legitimized themselves this year, as well as showing, I think they've already showed enough, and I just don't think they have what it takes to get to the next level. And then
And Jimmy Butler quietly just cheeses his way through the regular season, right?
Yeah.
Like just absolutely does nothing in the regular season. Doesn't even look like an all-star level player. And all of a sudden in the postseason, he looks like a top 5 guy in the NBA.
Yep, it's almost like load management by playing. Just play at 75%, so you can play at 100 in the playoffs. But just real interesting. But I guess whatever works. I mean, they're in the second round, about to be third. So, and then for the last one, we are going to go to Nuggets Suns. This is a series that I'll be honest, I thought was going to be a lot more one-sided. I really liked the Nuggets in this. But as we've seen Nikola Jokic put up some insane stat lines, they've really felt empty. And haven't really contributed to the win or winning basketball. Meanwhile, the Suns, namely Durant and Booker, even without Paul, putting up heroic performances, have seemed to make all the difference. So to me, this series has really been one of insane performances where one team benefits from them, while the other not so much for some reason. So Wilson, what are your kind of thoughts on this series as we wrap up the show today?
Yeah, this series to me, I don't want to be too disrespectful to that Suns roster, but to me, this really feels like the Denver Nuggets versus Kevin Durant and Devin Booker. And it's something that you and I have talked a lot about. We've talked quite extensively about the offensive load that those two players are having to take, as well as just the minutes per game that they're playing. And I have to say that I really feel like I was proven wrong in games 3 and 4. I was not sure that the offense was going to be sustainable. I've said before, having to average 70 plus combined points per game between two players just does not seem sustainable. In NBA history over the last 20, 30 years, I think Kobe and Shaq were the highest scoring combined duo at 59 points a game. For KD and Booker to be doing 10 to 15 more points a night to that duo is just absolutely insane to me. But the truth is, they tied the series 2-2, and obviously there's a game going on tonight where we'll see who comes out of that game 5. But to me, I still like Denver in this series. I guess my big point is I just keep harping on the minutes and the load, but I think we're going to see kind of what happened to Kevin Durant in that Milwaukee Bucks series a couple years ago, where his individual brilliance is going to get them 2-3 wins. I don't know if it wins them that 4th game in the series, and I think part of the reason that Jokic and his performance have felt so quiet is because they felt so easy. The 53-point game, it didn't really feel like he had to work for that. And to me, that just seems like a more sustainable way of winning these basketball games. So I still like Denver to come out of the series, but a small part of me is rooting for the Suns because the offensive efficiency being put on display by Booker and just the offense of Kevin Durant is truly spectacular to watch. And the basketball purist in me enjoys watching that.
See, I might be able to enjoy it too if it didn't rely so much on it being on one of my least favorite players in Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, who just is maybe complains more than anyone in the league. And in that Clippers series, namely, you really just kind of saw the two ideologies of the NBA, which is, star-driven basketball versus team-driven basketball, and I'm a fan of star-driven basketball, but not when it's from Kevin Durant and Devin Booker, and I completely admit that's biased, but like you said, at what points is 40 minutes a game for 14 games, then going into the third round, how much is that going to hurt you? And I think, again, great example being that Bucks game last year. Durant in those last few games just looked tired, and he still played fantastic, but it's just not sustainable, and the games feel empty because it kind of became the same thing with Jokic, where they're like, Jokic is going to do what he does. We don't have an answer for him, but you don't have an answer for our guys either, so we're just going to bet on our guys and hope your guy slips up and falls. And Jokic, again, as great of a player as he is, he's not like a guy who's taking the ball with 10 seconds left and taking a game winner like Kevin Durant or Devin Booker are. So I just think X factor in these close games favors the Suns. Meanwhile, if the better team to me in terms of depth is the Nuggets, but again, it's just the star power the Suns have is just truly insane. But I think it's just going to be curious to see going forward. And obviously, like you said, we'll see tonight here soon. Very close one going into halftime tonight. So, we might see a game 7 here, but regardless of that, I just think I still think the Nuggets win this one.
Yeah, this is a series that really feels like home court is a really big advantage. People make a lot about that Denver home court and the altitude. I think it's a real thing. And again, to continue to harp on this minutes and fatigue factor, going to Denver in a game 7 when they're playing basically every other day at this point, I really don't think as good as KD and Booker have been down the stretch and offensively what they've been able to create, I don't think Booker can shoot 60% from the field in a game 7. And again, to go back to how easy it's looked for Denver, the role players are going to be more comfortable. Obviously, the stakes of game 7 are high, but Denver, quietly has been battle tested. They've been in a lot of these series. They've come back from down 3-1. I like Denver, so that's where I'd put it.
All right, no, I agree. And here's something I also found out today was, I'll be honest, I don't watch a ton of Denver games. And I did not realize that they had Ish Smith making it his 13th team he's been on in the NBA. So I think it'd be pretty cool to see him win a ring. That's the only positive of the Nuggets, in my opinion. But
and Ish Smith was undrafted.
He was. Yep.
Yeah.
Again, like you brought up earlier, a lot of undrafted guys having big impacts in these playoffs. I think it's very exciting, and I also think it shows kind of a side thought, but I think with one of the positives of social media as well as the internet has been, everyone can be put on display now. And I think,
Absolutely.
a few months ago, we talked about the downside of it, being the third grade team that was showing off and stuff. And I think there are negatives, but the fact that now it is easier than ever for anyone to be on the roster, it's awesome. And I think it's one of the reasons we're seeing undrafted guys go off is because I think before they just wouldn't have the chance. So I'm not trying to derail our playoff podcast, but I just think, for how much we crap on social media and this highlight style basketball, it's gotten a lot of guys opportunities who've now turned themselves into great NBA players. And I think that's awesome.
Absolutely. Since, we're kind of derailing here at the end of the pod, but we talked about DePaul a little bit. I guess my little kind of throw-in would be, I don't know if you saw this, but in the WNBA, not the WNBA, sorry, the women's college basketball, there was a DePaul star. I don't remember her name. I want to say it was Anissa off the top of my head, but she just transferred to LSU. And so LSU women's basketball is looking like the 2017 Warriors roster. Going to be absolutely stacked. I have to admit, I don't watch a lot of regular season college women's basketball, but I followed that tournament really closely, and I might have to tune in next year because we're about to see one of the most historic runs in college women's basketball.
No, and women's playoff basketball is very exciting. I think to me it was more exciting this year than the men's. And
Absolutely.
I actually watched I broadcasted the women's DePaul game at Butler this year.
Really cool.
And I think she had 30-20 or something.
Yeah, she averaged
insane.
26, 28 a game. It was an absurd season.
Yeah. But yeah. Well, regardless of that, that'll be it for today's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed. We'll be doing an episode here soon as the Eastern Conference and Western Conference Finals game approach. We'll do an episode of that as well as the finals shortly thereafter because, it just ramps up here. But regardless, we hope you guys enjoyed. And we will see you guys next time. Later.